Together, we boldly, confidently, joyfully step into the light. The light, it is that divine intelligence that created all that is. So relax and get comfortable. Take a deep breath, getting that oxygen all the way down to your tummy. Hold it for a moment, and then release it completely. And again, draw in another deep breath, holding it for a moment. And as you release that breath, release any cares and concerns that may have come in with you this morning. Once again, breathe deeply, long and slow, and then release that breath. Now allowing your body to easily and naturally take over an optimal rhythm of breathing for you. We consciously step into the light this morning. I came to this quiet place and found you waiting for me, God. I hadn't heard you call. I had no seeming need at all, but I just felt guided to be still. And here you are. My heart is open to your will. Speak to me, God, for I am listening within myself. I hear you in my mind, a kind of moving. It's in the quiet of a forest. Pleasant sounds, soft and whispering to my heart. In this place apart, oh God, thank you for the peace I feel. The sure knowing that you are here and real, and that we are one in this quiet place. For this sacred moment, in oneness, in unity with Mother, Father, God, we are grateful for the wisdom, the guidance, and the insight that comes from these sacred moments. We are grateful for the extraordinary divine powers we each have within us. We are grateful. And we joyfully commit ourselves to an expanded awareness of those powers and capabilities, to using them wisely, and to enjoying the blessings that they give us, that we get to share in our world. We are grateful. And we say, thank you, God. Amen.
This is a song I wrote when I was struggling with, where's peace? I am aware of the deep and divine peace in my heart. I am aware of the deep and divine peace in my heart.
Thank you so much, Therese. I can only imagine that the peace you were seeking in that moment came to you. Well, good morning, everybody. Or at least as many of those of us who made it through the snow. Yeah, we had a double whammy this morning between Spring Forward, which I forgot to do. Fortunately, I get up early anyway, but at one point as I was getting ready, I couldn't believe my morning had blown by so quickly. And I suddenly realized the clock was an hour off from where I thought I was. And then, of course, the snow gets to be a little daunting and a little tiring now, isn't it? Funny that we're discussing order today, because we're seeing it in our world all around us this morning and in different ways. Have any of you had the opportunity to go down to the Minneapolis Institute of Art and take in their exhibit on Egypt's sunken cities? Got a few? We were there a few weeks ago. Yeah, you were there, I remember you. It's a fascinating exhibit. Just in a nutshell, on the Delta Nile, where the Delta flows into the Mediterranean Sea, in ancient Egypt, in the era of the pharaohs, which is about 2000 BC, they built 2 cities out on that delta. It's presumed that these were port cities. A lot of activity took place, bringing in goods, shipping out finished goods. They were very prosperous cities. They were sizable cities. They had huge temples. When you walk into the Institute of Art, they have 2 monumental statues from one of the temples that stand easily 15, 18 feet high. We're not talking about little villages and towns. We're talking about major metropolitan areas. And these cities thrived for well over 1,000 years, probably several thousand years, until they sank. Being built on the Delta without a thorough understanding of very critical principles of physics, these cities eventually disintegrated and literally slipped into the sea, because the engineers and the construction people who built those cities lacked some crucial understandings. They lost their cities, they lost their homes, they lost their temples, they lost their whole place of business for lack of understanding. Well, the exhibit is fascinating. I highly recommend it. But I walked away from that thinking, okay, how does this play out from a spiritual perspective? And I began to look at the power of understanding. As you and I understand spiritual principles, and as we live from that understanding of spiritual principles, we are building our lives and our activities on solid ground. We're building our lives and activity on spiritual truth that literally stands under everything we do in life. Understanding is one of those 12 powers of man that Charles Fillmore alerted us to. 12 powers of all people. And we can appear to be successful in our life from outer perspective, but like those beautiful, monumental, massive cities, without solid understanding, ultimately we will fail as well. And we get that understanding when we are grounded in spiritual law. Now, if our power of understanding is underdeveloped, we might have a real difficult time comprehending life. We might have a difficult time getting to that place of knowing. We might have a diminished capacity to perceive anything beyond the obvious and literal. If we have an overdeveloped sense of understanding, power of understanding, we might come across as a know-it-all. And we might invest ourselves in perceiving things that are not actually there, either literally or figuratively. Fillmore reminds us there are two ways of getting understanding. One is by following the guidance of spirit that dwells in you. The other is to go blindly ahead and learn by difficult experience. You think you ever do that?
Hallelujah.
Spiritual understanding, he says, is the ability of the mind to apprehend and realize the laws of thought and their relationship to each other. And then there's intellectual or human understanding. He refers to that, but we gain mostly through experience or through the proverbial school of hard knocks. It's a powerful way to learn. It also can be a very painful way to learn. Intellectual understanding is often subject to temptation and egoic needs. Our reason, our intellect can lead us to an understanding that appears to be valid and practical, but it may lead us astray. Conversely, understanding from the spiritual perspective is based in spiritual law that are changing, that are unchanging, that are stable. Spiritual law literally stands under the truth, under the essence of all things. When we have spiritual understanding, as we develop it, we're developing our own ability to know, to perceive, to comprehend, and to see from a spiritual perspective. And it's also the ability to apply that knowledge from a place of internal knowing. We gain spiritual understanding from our time in the silence. Those insights that come, that Kathleen introduced us to this morning in the Daily Word, always transcend intellectual understanding. We may call it knowing, or the still small voice. Have you ever ignored that still small voice? I recall a time in my life when I was about to make a job change. I left a very stable, solid job because there was something out there that looked more exciting and more intriguing to me. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I was hearing, don't go there. But that new opportunity looked so engaging. More money, more opportunity in a lot of respects. I was actually working for a builder in Bloomington who built high-end homes. And I had this vision working for the builder, building high-end homes. I'd wind up with a high-end home at a very reasonable price. But Spirit was saying, don't go there, Laurie. I didn't listen. I started that new job, and it lasted all of 2 weeks. In fact, I quit my previous job to start this and found myself unemployed just 2 weeks later. The builder saw some things on the horizon that were going to affect his business and said, gee, I'm sorry, Laurie, we thought we were going to need you, but I guess not. Goodbye. What would have happened if I had relied on my spiritual understanding and listened to that still small voice? But I was listening to intellect, and intellect was painting this wonderful picture that really appealed to me and my ego. And so I decided not to listen to Spirit and paid for it quite dearly. Order works closely with understanding. As we develop our power of understanding by studying spiritual law and living from it, like the 5 Principles or many of the other books we have in our library and almost all of the classes we offer here, we are empowered to develop order in our life. Order is how we organize our lives, our living space, our work. It's about sequencing our activities and our world. It's about the ability to make plans and follow through with them. And it's also the ability to adjust along the way as things come up that call us to tweak and adjust. Now, if we have an undeveloped sense of order, we have a great difficulty trying to create balance in our life. We have difficulty adapting to change. There's an inability to sequence our life to bring things to a successful conclusion. We might appear disorganized. We wind up backtracking constantly because we haven't done things in an appropriate order of execution. We might have a really hard time completing the projects we set out to do. We might live in a very messy and disorganized environment if we don't have a good sense of order. The flip side, though, is we might have an overdeveloped sense of order. We might be super fastidious and obsessive to the point of compulsion. Picture this. You're out for dinner with a friend or friends, and one of them has this overdeveloped sense of order. And as you sit down to dinner, they look at the place setting and they move the fork and they move the knife and they align the napkin and get everything perfect order. Oh, and the water glass really should be over here. You ever seen that? And then you reach over to use the salt. Don't you dare put that salt back in the wrong place. You're going to disrupt their sense of order. We can go to the extreme when it comes to the power of order. And when we go that far with it, it doesn't serve us as much as having an undeveloped sense of order doesn't serve us. Fillmore says the power of order is the idea of adjustment. And as order is established in our thoughts and in our minds, our affairs will become one and harmonious with the universe. In other words, when we identify and claim our spiritual power of order, we're enabled to organize our lives and our activities effectively. We're enabled to create balance in our lives and adapt to change. Balance, that's a key word, isn't it? I can't tell you how often people come to me and say, I need balance in my life. How do I get that? That is the power of order. Developing the power of understanding, we use the power of order to organize our lives. So where does divine order fall into this? Here's where we often get confused. The power of order, where we are using spiritual law and insight to organize our life, is somewhat different from divine order. Divine order, you might call coincidence, synchronicity, being in the flow. If things fall into place easily and elegantly, which is not to say they happen exactly as you think they should and exactly when you think they should. You just might be experiencing divine order. I don't know about you, but I see it all the time in my life. The more conscientious I am in nurturing my spiritual understanding, the more order unflows naturally in my life, which I recognize as the expression of divine order. I had an experience a number of years ago that really demonstrated to me divine order. I was very new in unity, very new on the spiritual path, and just totally captivated with it. Totally immersed myself in it. Every free minute I was in a class, I was in a workshop, I was doing something to embrace these amazing ideas that unity presented to me. I was developing understanding and learning to work with order. Well, I was out with some friends one evening and they ran into someone they knew, so I was introduced to this woman. And we fell in conversation at some point in the evening, just chatting, getting to know each other a little bit and how they knew my friends and how I knew the friends. And in the middle of the conversation, in fact, in the middle of a sentence, she stopped what she was saying and she looked at me and said, Have you ever thought about rebirthing? I had not a clue what she was talking about. And I found out shortly after that rebirthing was a very specific breathing protocol. It's a coached breathing protocol that helps you connect with your stuff, your issues, to bring them up for healing and resolution. Well, at that time in my life, in addition to exploring unity, I was also doing therapy and really focused on looking at my stuff with the idea of coming to a point of resolution. So the fact that she even brought this up was really timely. It was within a week, in a session with my therapist, where he looked at me and said, you know, by the way, Laurie, I think there's a process that you might really benefit from. It's called rebirthing. I was starting to believe that perhaps Spirit was talking to me. And within a week of that, I showed up at my Unity Church that Sunday morning in Seattle. And one of the big announcements at Unity in Seattle that Sunday was, there's this awesome new workshop coming. Guess what it was on? Rebirthing. That is divine order. And as we work our spiritual principles, as we immerse ourselves in them, with the idea of growing in our understanding and ordering our life according to spiritual principles, we open the door to this higher sense of divine order, this higher experience of divine order. How many of you have had an experience, just by a show of hands, where things just kind of fell into place in amazing ways? Okay, you know what I'm talking about. And the more we do our spiritual work, our spiritual principles, our daily practices, the more we develop understanding, power, faith, life, elimination, all of those things, the more we are open to the experience of divine order. So what do we do when divine order shows up? We surrender to it. When we affirm divine order, it puts us in a positive and hopeful place of mind. And then we let go and let that higher wisdom be in charge of all of our life circumstances. And we trust that that higher wisdom will have a better outworking than we could ever possibly come up with, knowing Spirit is in charge. If you've ever read Romans 8, verse 28, it tells us what this is. It tells us about this. It says, all things work together for good to those who love God, those who are called according to his purpose. What that's telling us is as we do our spiritual work, things are going to work out for us in ways that might be well beyond our own imagination. A daily word from some time ago tells us seasons change. The sun and the moon rise and set. My heart beats, all without my instruction or even my permission. Divine order is at work, even when it's not easy for me to see. I might even question that divine order exists when it appears that chaos is what's happening in my life. I simply cannot perceive the bigger picture. This is exactly when I need to remind myself divine order is always working in my life and in the universe. When we build our lives, our relationships, our world, based on spiritual understanding, we build on solid ground. And building on solid ground, we're empowered to use that spiritual power of order. And the more we immerse ourselves in living from spiritual understanding and order, the more divine order appears in our life, clearing the way in ways that are truly amazing and miraculous. So let's join together once again in our affirmation for the day as we take in insights about order, understanding, and divine order. Together, in sync with divine order, I realize my greatest potential. Surrendering to the flow of spirit, I experience synchronous events as an everyday occurrence. I realize my greatest dreams with absolute peace, grace, and ease. May divine order and understanding guide your life elegantly.